Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, show I put together to help celebrate the fact that 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games in general. So I'm inviting folks I know or have contact with who've been involved in the development of D&D and other role playing games to come on in and have conversations about you know, why we love this thing we love and do. And those of you who are watching, most of the people who are watching this, you're used to this being live. Oh, we're not live today. I'm recording it. Though we should have some people in the chat room with me. I am not available on whatever Wednesday this is, so I hope you're doing well. Um, I'll be back live on the following Wednesday. Not even telling you what dates they are because I don't remember. I write it down so I don't have to remember. Anyway, today my guest is someone who's come up in conversations previously. It is cartoonist and game designer Jeff D, who is one of the early members of the TSR Art Department and has gone on to do a lot of very interesting game design and illustration work on his own. We'll talk about all of that. I won't say too many other things because you know how my brain is. I'm likely to get them wrong. Better just to bring Jeff on in and tell you his story himself. So here we go. Hey Jeff.
Hey everybody.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking some time to do this.
Yeah, glad to be here, Stan. Thanks for asking me, man.
So again, I gave a very brief who are you, but when you introduce people and they say, "Well, who are you? What have you done? Why would I know your name? What's the answer to that?"
Artist and game designer. Got my start in the very early days of Dungeons and Dragons. Not the very, 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 very earliest, but I was there within the first several years. Illustrating stuff as far back as first edition AD&D.
Mm. Um, and uh, so what what was your introduction to the game itself? How did yeah, I guess that's
I could tell you exactly. So I had two older brothers,
hmm
and the eldest was in high school, and he was in a gaming group doing various kinds of games. But one time, I very clearly recall riding with in the car with my mom to go pick him up, and he was at a friend's house who had you know, a screened-in front porch, and up there on the front porch, they had a table, and there was a ref screen, and there was a big grid on the table, and there were miniatures, and there were the weird dice. And I, later quizzed him, what was that you were doing? And he told me about this game. And I begged and begged and begged to make him bring me to the next one where they didn't play D&D, they played Chainmail, which was the
wow,
slightly earlier miniatures, medieval miniatures combat,
right,
uh, tabletop miniatures game that had a fantasy section to it. And they put me in charge of one knight and a group of soldiers, and I promptly got all of my men killed. And then there was an orc fort nearby, and my one remaining commander figure ran into that fort and started attacking individual orcs. I was role playing my guts out
right,
before it was even really an RPG. And that was my earliest exposure. The most amazing thing about that memory to me is that it essentially hasn't changed. The hobby has been game master, screen,
right.
tabletop, players sitting around it, rolling the dice since the beginning. I don't know. It's not like I expected it to change, but um, that hobby emerged so full blown at
Yeah,
the very beginning, it just kind of amazes me.
yeah.
Uh,
So was that was D&D around? Was this chainmail? I mean, chainmail came before D&D. Were
Yeah.
were they playing D&D on other nights, or was this still pre D&D?
That's like the group. No, the D&D was out. That first time I saw them, they were playing actual, the original small box set.
Right.
Wow,
The the,
box
the
set.
white
Uh,
boxes, the
the
dice.
wood grain
Yeah, the
box,
wood
the
grain. Yeah, the
original.
original.
Um, yeah, that was fully out at that time, but they just the group did different things on different
Right.
weeks, so it just they were doing something different when I showed up.
And it's interesting. I
When
mean,
I
it's
tried when I tried to explain what I had seen to my friends, we attempted to simulate what they were doing, and I wound up drawing what was essentially my dungeon map was a vertical cross section of a dungeon with the
right.
layers stacked, right, with stairways going up and down, which is not at all how you do it, but that's as close as I could figure. Um, and the first time, the my actual first official role playing game experience wasn't D&D. It was Boot Hill.
Really.
I got hold of a copy of Boot Hill, and um, I guess I game mastered it, but I also was playing in it
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't know what we were doing, and there was a shootout on a train, and my character had a shotgun, and they were being attacked by the bad guys, and there was a dude like standing 10 feet in front of me, and I shot at him with my shotgun and missed. And that is the moment that I got really interested in how game RPG mechanics work,
Right. Right.
because that didn't I needed to
Miss.
know that yeah, that made some kind of sense. And if it didn't, I wanted the rules to change to make it make
Right.
more sense.
So where did you grow up? What part of the country was that?
Oh, well, so conveniently, I grew up about a half-hour drive south of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, in the Chicago suburbs.
Mm,
So after learning about D&D, I used to go up to Lake Geneva and shop at the Dungeon Hobby Shop back when like there was a converted house where the
right.
ground floor was the hobby shop. It's the place that is now the museum, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ground floor was the hobby shop, and the upper floor were their offices, and we would go up there every few weeks to see what was new. So like when Traveler first came out, I saw that on the shelves, right? um I remember when the monster manual came out for AD&D,
Right.
spotted that there, because that was like in color and
Hard. Yeah.
hardbound and stuff. I could
Yeah.
barely believe that this thing was getting so official. um yeah, so I was conveniently located, and by by the end of that period, I was in high school and cartooning in our high school newspaper and
Mm,
stuff, and bringing pictures that I had done up to show the guys behind the counter at the Dungeon Hobby Shop. And every once in a while, a guy from upstairs would be there and see what I had done, and that's how I got my connection that led to work after a couple of years at the Kubert School.
nice. So you went. I did. You know what? I didn't know you went to the Kubrick school.
Yeah, Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Arts.
Well, I know this is about D&D, but let's talk about that for a second because
Okay.
I I've only known one or two people that went there.
Uh-huh.
What was your experience with the Kubrick school?
Um, so imagine, if you will, all
Yeah,
right, you go to a class. It was this big old house,
yeah,
yeah, like thing that probably used to be almost a mansion. 3 or maybe 4 floors. It was gigantic, and ancient carved wooden balustrades and stuff,
right.
right? And you'd go into a class, and you'd sit down. They did have kind of like school furniture in it, but all of the instructors were not instructors, they were working artists. So
Right.
like the guy who did Dondi, the
Right.
Dondi comic
Yeah.
strip, was one of our instructors, right? Uh and they'd go up to the big easel at the front of the room, and they'd look at us, and they'd look at the easel, and they'd go, I don't know, well, so yeah, what you do is you just kind of draw, and they would draw some amazing thing, and we'd all be sitting there slack-jawed. I mean, that's about as much of a school as it was. The greatest thing about it is that, for each year that I was there, I got to spend all of my free time drawing. It
Right.
wasn't There wasn't that much about it that was structured instruction.
Right.
You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I don't want to talk it down. It was an amazing experience, but it was like that.
and a lot of people I know come out of almost any of all the people I know go to art school, and a lot of them, there's a significant percentage who come out with a story similar to that, no matter what the art school is, right? Some places are better at teaching than others, but in the end, what matters is that they got to spend all their time drawing, and
Yeah.
hopefully they got good feedback on it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, almost the best thing that I learned while I was there wasn't from there. One day I was at the local mall with my sketchbook,
Hmm.
and I was sketching, and a random stranger came by and saw what I was doing, and quite kindly suggested that I pick a line, right? I was doing scribbly kind of figures, right? Like I wasn't committing. And you may have noticed I eventually got a very precise
Yeah.
line style. I I was also heavily influenced by the John Byrne
Hmm.
is it Terry Austin, the
Very
inker?
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Byrne and Austin days on X-Men. That's what I wanted my stuff to look like.
Who
But I
was
think, and to a large extent, I wanted my stuff to look like that because of what this random stranger had said to me in a mall. Um,
huh?
that had a lot to do with how my stuff turned out, I think.
Um, awesome. All right, I'm gonna keep this conversation from becoming a comic book conversation because I
Okay.
could go there. But so you did. How long were you at Kubrick?
Um, Kubert.
Kubert, sorry.
Kubrick is the movie guy.
Yeah. No, I know. Like I said in my
I
intro, my brain
I
doesn't always
stayed
work
there.
that
I'm
way.
remembering now. I stayed a year and a half of a 3-year course,
Hmm.
leaving in the middle because I got a job at TSR.
Okay.
Right.
So, how did you
It's
get
like, why
that?
do I need to spend any more money learning how to do this stuff? Somebody will pay me to do it now.
Right. How did that offer come through? So clearly, you had the connection
um.
through the store.
Uh. So. Uh. That's also a fun story.
All right.
Um.
You know what? I'm going to start drawing while you tell that story.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Um. I also I was in New Jersey, or the Joe Cooper School is in New Jersey. Well, um, Stony Brook, Long Island, where Fantasy Games Unlimited was located, was not that far away. Right, it was a short
Yeah.
train trip, through New York to get out there. And Jack Herman and I had at a recent Gen Con showed our first version of Villains and Vigilantes
Mm-hmm.
to Fantasy Games Unlimited, and they were interested, so they were publishing our game. And the cover of first edition V&V was drawn in part at the Kubert School,
Okay.
um, and illustrations. In fact, in the first edition V&V, there are some cartoons about a character called Super Zarny. That those were drawn by my best friend at art school, Pete Matthews, who has
Okay.
gone on to he's gone on to make a career in greeting cards, and he's
Oh,
hilarious. So uh, so I was doing that work with Fantasy Games Unlimited on Villains Vigilantes, and I had pre-existing contacts at TSR, so I wrote to them, to Gary Gygax, I guess it must have been, letting him know where I was and what I was doing. And I got this terse letter back from Gary saying, well, if you're working for some other company now, then maybe you'd best just continue with them. um, which it's just a little disappointing. Um, and and then I returned home on a summer vacation and took my stuff up there and met with Dave Sutherland, who was the actual art director, and he hired me.
right.
After it was a year and a half of a 3-year course, and I quit the school and I went to work. And Gary and I never discussed it any further. He was, by that point, the creative offices were in downtown Lake Geneva, on the upper floor of an actual storefront that was now the Dungeon Hobby Shop.
Right.
And the business offices were in the big warehouse that they built out on the edge of town. So I hardly ever even interacted with Gary. The one time was when I think it was Minifigs had the license to do the official Dungeons and Dragons miniatures, and
Right.
that deal ended, and so uh it was deemed necessary that some of the D&D monsters had to be redesigned in order to make the minis that Minifigs was selling no longer accurate to D&D. And I was involved in redesigning the orcs and kobolds and hobgoblins and things, and I took sketches over to Gary at the warehouse for approval. But we never, I don't think he even probably remembered having been mad at me for for daring to work for
Right.
someone else, even though I wasn't his employee. some I was some snot-nosed kid that he'd seen my stuff one time. Um,
Well, I mean,
so what was the question? That
yeah,
story wandered around a bit.
that certainly answers
Okay.
the question.
Uh,
How you came to be
so
employed there. But I mean,
oh
that
yeah,
is, I
yeah.
only
Dave
ever,
Sutherland hired me. He was awesome. Loved
yeah,
Dave Sutherland.
yeah, he was. Um,
Uh,
I only ever interacted with Gary in before I came to work there, and in super brief,
yeah.
like fan encounters.
It,
But everyone I've talked to, who that kind of reaction from Gary sounds exactly right. Right? Yeah,
well,
reason to be mad about that, and yet he's going to be that way.
well, yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for people who suddenly are successful,
Yeah.
because there's a ton of pressures on them. I mean, I don't really, I'm not mad at him or anything.
No. No.
And
Well,
I have no ill feelings, and I did still go there and take the
right.
job,
No.
you
No.
know. I mean,
I'm
um,
sorry. I didn't mean to make it seem that way. But it's just some
sure,
people, and a lot of people who are friends of mine, who
yeah,
they just their initial response to situations can be more terse than required. But that's just
yeah,
how they deal with the world.
yeah. And also, I mean, we can kind of maybe ease into the whole hobby end of this too.
Mm,
The thing about the role playing games idea,
yeah.
is that it did not ever have to be Dungeons and Dragons. You know what I mean?
Right.
Once the idea's out there, it's like, imagine there was a first board game,
Right.
and it introduced the idea that you could have games on boards with pieces that move around. And then everybody else in the universe is now capable of making games with boards with pieces that move around.
Right.
And yet you're the first publisher of such a thing, and you're feeling like there was something that you're feeling proprietary about that, but
Right.
there's no way to control it. That has to have been rough. Um,
Yeah.
so I can understand, the pressures that he may have felt he was under. Uh, but I mean, that's still true to this day. They're role
Yeah.
playing the concept does not require Dungeons and Dragons.
Um. So when you got there, what were some of the early things you worked on?
The very I think the very earliest thing I ever did was an illustration in the Monster and Treasure assortment. No, I bet that's wrong. There was a book that had a bunch of characters in it.
The Rogues Gallery.
Rogues Gallery, that's the one. And I did a big paladin standing over the head of a slain dragon.
Okay.
All like heavily superhero inspired, and a lot of people remember that piece. I think that may have been the very first thing that I did.
Uh,
Um,
so what was it like on to be on staff? Uh, what what was the workflow like?
ah, so we would get the writers upstairs from us would have either written or edited a submission of say a module
Right.
and laid out the pages, and we would get these copies of those pages in like non-photo blue, just because that's the way they came, and with blank spaces left on them where it was convenient for them. Right?
Hmm.
No art person was involved in the choosing of where the empty spaces went. Right? It was purely editorial. And so our job was fill them empty spaces. And so you'd read the page and try to find the most interesting thing that you could depict from there, which is why you get occasionally a picture of an empty room. If you were lucky, there was some kind of trap or puzzle or something that you could depict, right? Um, and that was the job. And then we'd draw those things, and I guess Dave Sutherland signed off on them, but I don't remember any particularly uh, formal review or acceptance process. We just kind of did the art. Oh, and I also don't exactly recall how we decided who would do what. Um, I think that was Dave. I think he handed those pages to us with the
Right.
with the blank spaces, handed them to individual artists, and at a certain point, it became more like whole books or whole chapters of things like the deities and demigods that were assigned mostly to one artist or another, leading to a little tug of war between me and Errol Otis over who got to do the Cthulhu stuff.
Right.
And he won, and he was the right person to win, no question. Right? I just wanted it.
Well, I don't
Uh,
blame you.
so it was like that. It was rather informal, and we got to figure out how to fulfill the requirement of illustrating those pages.
Yeah, when Steve Sullivan, when I was chatting with Steve, he was saying a similar thing, and it just blew my mind. That it was here's 5 pages. You do the art that goes in these 5 pages. While we
Yeah,
were working on that, they finished 5 more pages, so they go to Steve or to Errol or to whoever was next in line.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And given how much care they take to uh, prep what has come, how far this has come in the 50 years,
Oh yeah, super corporate now.
yeah,
My goodness.
yeah. Um,
Though I have to say, I mean, I recently did some magic cards.
Yeah.
when Wizards finally got to the point of saying, "Oh, we've got Dungeons and Dragons and we've got Magic the Gathering. Let's bash those together," right? And wisely, in my view, hunted down some of us old timey illustrators to do cards and in for the first time in a black and white line art style.
Yeah.
And and they, I mean, they sent me a bunch of very formal, like, visual reference, like, here's the official way that a goblin looks now,
Right.
which was fine. Um, but other than that, it was rather hands off, and there was only one instance where there was ever any back and forth between me and the art director, and that's when they told me that they had changed their minds about what they wanted. There was a goblin card, the Goblin Javelineer,
Yeah.
that they wanted it to be a woman goblin,
Okay.
and it's a light infantry javelineer, so I put her in like a leather bikini kind of thing, and they go, "Oh, no, we're going to need you to put, more armor on her." So then I upped that to like full leather body armor. And they looked at that and they said, "You know what? We would rather you just made this a guy." Um, and that's the only time anything like that ever happened, and they paid me for every revision.
Right. Yeah.
So
They're
I
good
can't.
about that.
I know there's a lot of issues that some fans have with Wizards. I will just say, the one way that I interacted with them professionally, there was a second way, but on this issue, they were very easy to deal with. They paid extraordinarily well. The other thing was when I was doing my Kickstarters, recreating my original illustrations, which had all gotten dumpstered.
Right.
I don't know if you know that story. Um,
We'll
uh,
get that story in a minute.
um, they were, again, Wizards was very easy to deal with. That process has gotten more formalized over time, but not till I'd pretty much finished all my recreations that I really wanted to do. So, uh, um, I have not much in the way of personal ill will toward Wizards
Right.
either.
Um, so you say your original stuff got dumpstered. Uh,
Yeah.
People are shocked, always shocked to hear those stories. So let's shock them again. How did that possibly happen? What do you mean you?
I wish that I knew more details, or maybe I'm glad I don't, because I don't know. Somebody in the world who was working at TSR, between the time that I left and the time that Wizards bought them,
Right.
somebody it made the decision. Ooh, we've only got so many filing cabinets to keep old art in, and we don't need it anymore, and we've got more art being created. This old art is just taking up space, and they took great armloads of it and threw it in the dumpster. um, which was almost everything I ever did there. I assume other artists suffered the same fate.
Right.
um, I know that some pieces of mine survived. Like, there's a painting of a warrior in a yellow tunic lying on his back in a spider web with little red spiders all over him,
Right.
from the back of one of the modules, that still exists. Somebody rescued it and they framed it and have it hanging on their wall. I know because I've seen a photo, but I don't know who has it, and I don't care. Right? It was work for hire. Um,
Yeah.
but
So,
uh, but there came
so
a time in my life when, this was, um, mid '90s. The economy did a nosedive, and I was down here in Austin, Texas, working as a designer at a computer game company, and that company fired all of their entire design department, including me. And suddenly I had no income, and I nearly lost my house
Yeah.
for not having money. But the first one of my Kickstarters that I ran to recreate those lost originals and sell and ship prints to the Kickstarter backers
Right.
uh, did really, really well, and I saved my house.
Well,
Um,
so that's the
I
good story.
I think that
Oh,
was the Elric one.
right.
Uh, yeah, the Deities and Demigods Elric stuff, which was
Um,
tricky too because I had to get permission not just from Wizards but also from Michael Moorcock. Neither of which was willing to insist that they alone had the rights to those things, but both of which were willing to uh, say, we don't mind if you recreate it. So,
so all of the stuff you did at TSR,
yeah,
you were on staff, so it belonged to TSR.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I mean that's the kind of
Oh,
thing.
and the way that I found out that those pieces had been destroyed is that shortly after Wizards took over, they contacted me and they said, our policy here at Wizards of the Coast is that originals get returned to the artists.
Right.
So we just want to make sure we have your contact information correct so we can ship you all your stuff, right? Excuse me. And then months and months and months went by,
Uh,
and I reached out to them and said, "What's the deal?" And they said, "Oh, we're sorry, we didn't get any of your stuff. It was destroyed."
yeah. There's a bunch of. I mean, so I was at TSR at the end and into the Wizards years, and there were throughout the time that I was there, the first time I was there continued to be months where they would find a bill would come due for a storage locker in Wisconsin, and they would say we
Hmm.
don't want to do this anymore, and so everything that was there would get shipped out to Seattle, and we would
Hmm.
find stuff that we thought was lost.
Oh.
This continued to happen. Uh, I, I was there until
Excuse me.
2002. I went away. I wound up working uh, for Upper Deck and then doing freelance, and then coming back. I came back in 2011 as a contractor, and there were still two more times when they found large caches of D&D stuff in
Wow.
somewhere in the Wisconsin, northern Illinois area, and it
Yeah.
would get shipped back. It just the TSR's policy seemed to have been, when we're done with it, we'll rent a storage locker and throw it in there, and somehow we'll magically remember where it is, which was not true. They never remembered where any of it was.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that end of things. That was all over at the warehouse building.
Yeah.
And also years after I left. I mean,
Um. So I heard, and I've heard several people tell similar stories about how you came to leave TSR.
ah,
Um, Certainly, all of them, to some extent, are, well, Jeff got laid off, but a lot of them are, but but he goaded them into it.
so it wasn't,
What's your memory of this? This
first of all,
these
it's not just
special
me. It was definitely
are
me
you
and
and Bill
Paul Ritchie.
and Bill Willingham, right?
Um,
Maybe not.
yeah, must have been. But also Paul Ritchie and Evan Robinson from the
Right.
design department. We were all um very unhappy at how corporate things were starting to become. Because as far as we were concerned, we're in an industry about making stuff that is supposed to be fun, and they needed to get out of our way and let us make the fun.
Right.
Um, so um, it just sort of blurs into the story of me leaving Origin as well. So I don't want to get the details mixed up. Anyway, we were openly not on board with some policy and some new policy from corporate management, and so we got invited to the office and given our walking papers.
Okay. All right. The a version I've heard a couple of times has it that on the day when they started laying a bunch of different people, there was one of the early big layoffs.
Right,
That
the purges.
right that you and a couple other people had come to basically said, well, if they can fire them, they can fire anyone, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to get rid of me for sure. So you started
Right.
dramatically giving stuff away from your office, and that the powers that be saw that and said, all right, we'll fire them too.
I remember the attitude that you describe. I don't remember giving any of my stuff away, but more or less, yeah, that's the gist of it. But luckily for me, I had a pre-existing connection with Fantasy Games Unlimited, so losing the TSR job was not that big a deal. I just went out and started working full time at FGU.
um, so you were talking a bit just before about the Kickstarters and the art that you've done
Mm-hmm.
to recreate these lost originals. What uh, um, what are some of the pieces you've done that for?
Oh my gosh, it would be easier for me to list the few that I haven't done.
Well, what are some of the ones that are either you're you're proudest of or have good a story or two attached to either the original or the recreation?
Um, I don't know. Um,
That you want to share?
uh, I don't really have any stories about that. It was good, solid work, and it paid my bills. Um,
All right, fair enough.
uh, yeah, I don't really have anything for
Sure.
you there. Um,
Uh, an interviewer can dream.
I can tell you. I can tell you this. One of the neat things about doing those recreations was that, um, like, if you go through deities and demigods,
Mm-hmm.
there are blank areas in the pages of the original deities and demigods where there's an illustration could have gone there but didn't, or a lot of the deities just didn't get pictures,
Right.
and that was entirely because there are only so many artists on staff and so many hours in the day. So what I was able to do is, as stretch goals on those things, I did the illustrations that I would have done
That would have
had
done
there
the
been
stuff.
time for those. I have got Bess, the god of luck from the Egyptian pantheon, hanging on the wall here in my office, well, my game room.
See, you do have stories.
That's a little something, I guess.
Um,
So I got to do a lot of that kind of stuff. That was neat. Um, uh, there were some in one of the modules on the pages that have the maps. There were some tiny little figures like dropped in there, which had been created because there was a a little thought at one point that TSR would publish paper stand-up minis, and
right.
those were some pieces I had done for that. But that idea didn't take off, and so instead, those little things that would have been stand-up minis became tiny little illustrations. Well, when it came to doing them for the Kickstarter, I made them large and detailed and stuff.
Hmm.
So things like that, I was able to bring a little bit more to it. But that was a tricky thing to work on, because you want to give people what they remember, but also it had been 30 or 40 years since I'd done the originals, and I wanted to bring a little more to these things because I thought I could do some things better. So it was always a balancing act. How much better can I make this without it being unrecognizable?
Um, can you think of one of the ones that uh, where that became an issue in
Well,
particular?
that whole thing was actually sparked by a friend of mine here in Austin, asking me, could I recreate my drawing of Elric from that edition of Deities and Demigods
Right.
for him personally. And I did that. And on that one, this is pre Kickstarter, right? I
Mm-hmm.
didn't hold back. I just went kind of over the top with adding detail and stuff and correcting some of the anatomy and things. And it was it was that little tiny freelance assignment gave me the idea, well, maybe a lot of people would like to see these things, and the originals did get destroyed, so there's sort of a sense to it.
Right.
And that guy allowed me to use that recreated Elric, so that's the one piece that really doesn't isn't limited the way that I felt uh, I had to constrain myself on a lot of the others because it was done beforehand.
Yeah, I would think that most. Well, I was about to say something I knew wasn't true, but the audience is split between people who want it just the way it was, and people are happy to see the you know 30 years later Jeff D put his 30 years of experience into making that drawing only better.
Well, as it turns out, nobody ever confronted me about this,
Yeah.
and I'm sharing the turmoil that was going on inside my head leading up to this. Right? But particularly, consider those concerns on top of the fact that I was about to lose my house and I really needed to do this
Right.
right. It all worked out.
Well, I'm
And later, when I got the Tecumel license,
right.
and did my new game in the setting from TSR's Empire of the Petal Throne, um, I there are a crap ton of very unique monsters in that,
Right.
and so I did a series of Kickstarters because I knew how to do that then, where I was creating illustrations that would eventually be for Baythorn, my Tecumel RPG,
Mm-hmm.
um, and selling the prints to essentially that's the backer bonus is the prints of these creatures. That's how I was able to illustrate that huge book, um, by getting fans to subsidize the illustrations.
Um, what uh, what is it that drew you to getting the Tecumel license?
Ah, okay. This is going to go a very dark place,
Uh oh.
but um, so Empire of the Petal Throne was the second role playing game that TSR ever published,
Mm-hmm.
less than a year after original D&D. Um, Original D&D had made it to Minnesota and was being played on campus at University of Minnesota. I'm not sure what the name of the school is.
Right.
And there was a guy there who was a longtime tabletop miniatures gamer who found out about Dungeons and Dragons and had been working on a science fantasy setting that he wanted to write novels in for decades. He'd been working on these things.
Mm-hmm.
So his gaming group, one day they were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he goes, well, I've got a more interesting setting for this. And he basically wrote what became Empire of the Petal Throne, a very original D&D inspired RPG, but set in on his science fantasy planet Tekimel. Pardon me, I've got a cough.
Go ahead.
I'm really sad that I've run out of root beer. So, that was very, very early days, and I mentioned that my eldest brother was the gamer of the family,
Mm-hmm.
and he went off to college, and he took the entire role playing game collection with him, except
Ooh.
for Empire of the Petal Throne. So that is the game that I cut my teeth on as a GM.
Oh, wow.
For the years of him being away at college, that was the RPG that I had. And so I developed a liking for the setting and so on. And when years as the years went on, and I got more and more into the game design myself, um, kept wanting to improve the mechanics to Empire of the Petal Throne, and eventually, just for my own purposes, I was I had a pretty uh, solid adaptation of Empire of the Petal Throne, or conversion of Empire of the Petal Throne to my Pocket Universe system,
Okay.
and so that years had passed, and TSR was no longer publishing it, and there had been a couple of attempts by other companies to do Tekimel based RPGs, all of which fell right over on their faces and died. And so I contacted MAR Barker and said, "I've got I've got another adaptation of your setting
Right.
with these rules, and are the rights available?" And he goes, "Well, um, right now we're in the process of setting up the Tekimel Foundation, which is going to manage the rights to all this intellectual property, and so I'll have them get back to you when that's all set up." And then he died,
Mm-hmm.
and I did get contacted by the Tekimel Foundation, and the process continued until I completed the game and got a contract with them, and went through all the illustrating and stuff, and published that, which I'm very proud of the work that I did on it. And my spouse wrote the Kurt Hills Atlas, which is a incredibly detailed, um, like hex crawl worthy section of the Empire of Tsolyanu, with tons of detail. You can finally really run a Tekimel campaign without having to absorb all of the world detail first, which has always been one of the problems with the setting.
Right.
And everything is going great until it came out that MAR Barker, creator of Tekimel, was a fucking Nazi.
Yeah, that.
I mean, I don't mean a uh guy you just don't like kind of Nazi. I
Right.
mean a guy who was on the editorial board of a Holocaust denial journal, and guy who secretly wrote a science fiction novel under a pseudonym about the heroic underground Nazis and how they were saving humanity when they reemerged from the shadows in the near future.
Yeah.
That kind of Nazi.
A Nazi Nazi.
So I now share a design credit on the cover of Bethorm, the Plane of Tekimel, my Tekimel game, with a literal Nazi. And just imagine how much fun that is.
Yeah.
So that's where it would go. It's super dark, right off a cliff. Uh, we have not produced any more Tekimel material since that happened. But I can't bring myself to kill off the game Bethorm, because Manda, my partner,
Mm,
did amazing work on that Kurt Hills Atlas. It's like, I think, one of the finest gaming supplements ever to have existed. And I can't see her going back and retroactively wasting all of that effort just because the creator of the thing
right.
turned out to be a reprehensible asshole. And But it's rough, man. I mean, I totally sympathize with the Lovecraft fans about him being you
Right.
know, a fascist, but Lovecraft at least had the excuse of being a fascist before World War II. You know,
That's
when you could, it's a stretch, but you could try to argue that he didn't see where it was going. Um, you can't say that about a guy who's a professor at a university, since the 50s has been doing all this stuff. So, yeah. Ugh. Let's move on.
but it's
That
certainly. I mean, when we can move on if you'd like, but it raises that interesting question of the, there's a lot of what he did create in Tekimel, which is fascinating and worth
Yeah.
exploring.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but here's the
how
thing.
do you
Here's
do
the
that with a
thing.
conscience?
You could
Yeah,
I can see playing like an ancient Rome RPG, and there's slavery, right? Because they had slavery in ancient Rome.
right,
And I can see including that in the RPG, uh, and but also still, saying to the people playing, who buy your game, look, we put this in for historical completitude, but you're not obligated to stick with it, right?
right.
Make this your own. um and But when it's a fictional setting,
Yeah,
and the person that created it was a Nazi, and there's slavery and things, it's a lot harder
yeah, yeah.
to say to yourself that it doesn't matter, that it was just trying for some sort of, similarity to. Yeah, and that's how I always used to describe the Tekkamel setting to people, right? Yeah, it's like ancient elements of ancient Babylon and ancient Central America, right? It has those kind of vibes. And those people had slaves, right? So it's sort of got pseudo historicalicity things, but you can't say that when you know what
Right.
the inner thoughts of the creator were. That stuff is there on purpose.
Yeah.
That makes it rough.
It's. I certainly. I certainly agree. I don't agree with one bit of what you said. The complicating factor, and I think that as someone who's thinking about publishing or writing for or doing something to uh, um, put out something that will promote this guy and his work, um,
Yeah, yeah.
there's no doubt. How do you conscious that? But
Well,
if,
thank goodness he's dead.
right,
There's that. But he does have a wife who is still making money. Behalf of his estate, she is still bringing in money off of Tekkamel related things.
yeah,
And you can promise to me, as the Tekkamel Foundation have promised to me, that, oh, she didn't know anything about him being a Nazi, and doesn't share those feelings herself. Yeah, but he was secretly one for decades. How do I know any of that anymore?
yeah,
It's really hard. It's really hard.
yeah.
I would completely bail. Honestly, I would have completely bailed on it if it wasn't for the fact that Manda made a thing that I think is so amazing that it has to stay in print. So,
Um, so
her source book,
right,
which is all, that's all her stuff. There's very little. That's the reason why the Tekkamel Foundation allowed us. We wanted to make develop a portion of the map in detail for gamers for usability, right?
Right.
Because the original maps for that game, a hexagon is like 100 miles.
Yeah.
It's pretty useless for day-to-day adventuring. We wanted to make something at that scale, and so they basically found a portion of the map that had as little as possible published about it, so we could do that development ourselves. And boy, she did, and it's great. But underneath it all, that world, man. Anyway, let's move
Okay,
on.
let's move on to something else then. So we talked about the fact that Villains and Vigilantes was what
Oh yeah,
got that started before uh,
yeah,
you came to TSR, and it was
yeah,
where you went after you left
yeah,
TSR, and that also is still around in a new format.
yeah. So the fun little tidbit. Just as I was leaving TSR, they began their negotiations with Marvel that eventually became their Marvel Superheroes role playing game.
Right.
But there was a little bit of talk since Jack Herman and I had been developing second edition Villains Vigilantes, which is markedly different from first edition V&V.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of talk about maybe making what became second edition, i.e., revised V&V, right? About taking that to TSR as a submission and say, how about use this for your Marvel game? That is not how it turned out. And, in retrospect, I'd be a lot better known if that had happened. But it gave us the freedom to do what we wanted with it later. Um, but there's another fun dark story. We were involved
You
in a
seem to have a lot of fun dark
5-year
stories.
long legal battle with the original publisher of
Yeah.
that, about which I am legally not allowed to say very much about because of a non-disparagement clause
Uh
in the
huh.
eventual settlement. What I will say is that Jack Herman and I wound up founding Monkey House Games, which is now the sole publisher of all editions of the Villains and Vigilantes role playing game and the adventures that Jack wrote that had previously been published by FGU.
Right. So now it's got a different name. Right?
So after we won that contract, I mean, the revised V&V is now coming out from us, and it's still the same, but we added a little material. But what we wanted to do all along, since it had been again like 40 years since the last update,
Right.
is we wanted to do a new edition. So the outcome of the legal battle is that the original publisher gets to retain ownership of the Villains and Vigilantes trademark, but we have freedom to use that trademark for things we make,
Right.
right? But we weren't going to be allowed to ever sell it. And so, because someday there's going to need to be a new owner of Villains and Vigilantes. So we needed to rebrand. Uh, and so the third edition Villains and Vigilantes is still Villains and Vigilantes, but the big title on the cover is Mighty Protectors, which is a
Right.
callback to our home gaming group.
Right.
Are you looking at the clock?
No, I'm looking to see
Are
if
you
we have
for a copy?
detectors
Oh,
here or if it's on the shelf over there. I don't have it here. But there we go. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if I was holding one up too?
I just happen to have it here because this is my gaming table and I was running it recently. Um, Mighty Protectors, which is I think the greatest heights we've gotten to with superhero RPG design. Um, yeah, so it's both Villains Vigilantes and Mighty Protectors in the same way that second edition is also revised. It's just different names for
Right.
the same thing.
And so now that's coming out through Monkey House Games,
Uh-huh.
and you have additional material coming out for it at fairly
Well,
regular.
so we have already published adventures and a World War II source book called War Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
That's War Heroes is actually the playtest campaign that our good friend Brian Adams ran while we were developing third edition, all during the legal battle. Um, at the end of all that, he took his notes and we hammered them into shape, and that is now the World War II source book. So that's out. I am currently working on the Monsters source book, where you play a heroic monster.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack is writing another adventure, and um, we've got a guy working on a science fiction source book, which will
Sweet.
expand the outer space stuff a lot.
As you and when we were talking earlier, you were earlier in this conversation, you were saying that the first role playing game that you played was Boot Hill, not D&D. I can't say that Villains and Vigilantes was the first role playing game I played, but it certainly was the one I played the most in my early days
Huh?
of gaming. So,
Ah, glad that you enjoyed it.
all right. So we're about an hour, so I'm going to pause here. I'm going to be finishing this off screen. Those of you who've watched before know I'm going to finish this, pull up the rest of the sketch. That'll get finished eventually. If you are a subscriber to our free newsletter, you'll get to see it first. Otherwise, you'll have to wait with the rest of the rubes till I decide to release it to the public. But I'll stop doing that. And we've been talking here for about an hour, and about a lot of the way back stuff. But the focus of the show, or the reason I started this show, is that this is the 50th anniversary of D&D and role playing. And I think you had something. I don't remember whether this was before we came on or after we came on, but you said something interesting about the idea that this is a game, or a game form, a hobby form, that although it's 50 years old and there have been a lot of changes, it kind of came out and it was what it was, and that hasn't changed much since.
Right. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is the first published game that partakes of this kind of play. But the idea of a game being a simulation of a world where um, things are not set in stone; they exist in your imagination, but they have reality and validity, and you can solve problems by oh, the game master, we're in a room, is there a chandelier? Oh, yeah. Okay, well, now I can swing on that chandelier to get up to the upper end of the broken stairway, right? um that kind of thing, and where you play a particular character, and where you follow that character's adventures over time. I mean, all these things, nothing in no games existed like that before. um, and so, and again, nothing against Dungeons and Dragons. They were the first.
Right.
The TSR were the first guys to put this all together and publish a thing. But uh, once that idea is out, I mean, that's why we have so many different role playing games on the market these days, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of ways to approach uh, that concept mechanically, and that's what I love about doing RPG design is um, the coming up with different ways, different levels of abstraction that you can play at, and different processes for resolving conflicts and things. It's that all fascinates me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the the crossing of the screens. You can point to lots of games, as you were just saying, where the pieces you have or the parts of the game represent characters or things, but all of the interaction is on the game surface, whatever that is. Th-
Right,
This is this format, starting with Dungeons and Dragons and is going way out beyond that now, is the first iteration, I think, where what that character thinks or feels has impact on the game. Right? You could
right.
move your chess pieces around and make funny voices about them, but in the end, they're just going to be chess pieces.
Right. Right. And you can't, I mean, you're for playing chess.
Yeah.
The rules of chess are the rules of chess. You
Right.
can't say, oh, well, my pawn here picks up a rock, because surely there's a rock on the ground where he's standing, and flings it, a couple of squares over there to bonk the enemy queen on the head. You
Yeah.
just can't. But you can totally try that in an RPG,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is what's amazing about them. Now, I don't know how familiar you are. Have you seen any of the? I mean, there's some documentary films that have examined the origins of role playing.
Mm.
It can be traced back through Dave Arneson's gaming group and Dave Wesley, who got concepts from a tabletop miniatures game used by the military to train officers in the
Right.
1800s, where the thing that was in that 1800s game is the idea that there's a referee who lets you try things,
Right.
and it took it from the military miniatures where it's just the tables of odds and the dice, and then that's what happens, into, well, no, you can come up with ideas outside the bounds of the mechanics and try things. And David Wesley took that and he did his Brownstein games,
Mm.
that's named for the fictional setting of the first one he ran, where it wasn't uh it wasn't so much like Napoleonic armies in battle against each other, but a town with a bunch of different forces, and each player controlled one of these little forces, and you got to try things. And in one of his games, two players decided that their leaders needed to duel one another,
Mm.
and boom, you got an RPG, right? Because now you've got a situation and you're individuals and you're going head to head, right? um, that that really is the starting point of modern RPGs. And Dave Arneson took that and expanded it into his Blackmore game, and then Gary Gygax got hold of it and expanded it into Greyhawk and his things, and got it published. So it really, I mean, but it's amazing that we're in this hobby that didn't really exist
Right.
before 50
Yeah.
some odd years ago, and that's pretty great. Um, uh, I have some criticisms of some of the directions in which people have taken the concept since then, or the less criticisms and more just uh, um, there are people who think that what role playing games are really about is telling a story,
Mm.
and I reject that approach. You get a story, no question, but an explicitly story game puts story front and center, and the goal, rather than to have an adventure, the goal is to have a satisfying story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are incompatible. And I don't mind the existence of story games. I just wish that we could tease them apart, and those of us who care about adventures work on, focus on making role playing games that are better at that, and the story game people can focus on games that are better at that. That's how I feel.
I I I don't disagree. I think that's what the market kind of is doing, right? You have games that do that. And the thing is,
Well,
we'll
the
fight about
mark
one being right and one being wrong, and that's where like
where but my complaint is that the market isn't doing that. Um that any RPG which gives players s- special mechanics that they can use to modify game events outside of the bounds of the simulation, just because they've got those points that they can use to influence things, you're moving towards story games.
right,
And I totally understand the appeal, right? Just the sheer selfish appeal of players wanting to be able to make it so their character doesn't die at a certain point, right? I get that. But it has gotten to the point where it has been years since I've walked into a store and picked up a new RPG that did not have some form of that thing in it. And I I get into a lot of trouble on Facebook being
all right,
vocal about my feelings that that is just fundamentally opposed to what was great about this new kind of hobby that got created 50 years ago. It's that is a fine thing to do if you want to do a different kind of thing, which is gameize the process of making stories. That's a fine other kind of thing to do. I
right.
I I do not believe that it is a you got your chocolate in my peanut butter and therefore it's great kind of thing. Anyway,
All
um
right. So
there's a bunch of controversy. That'll get you a lot of
I, you know what? I
comments
don't find that
on this
controversial.
post.
I think the big
Oh, just wait.
controversy. No, I see the biggest controversy to me is that uh, I look at it and I do see both those things out in the market, and I personally I don't go in for the big time storytelling games either. I don't like. Uh, I don't enjoy them as much for a lot of the reasons you're saying. I like the adventure version of what's going on rather than the craft a story version. I don't exclude it entirely from
Which doesn't make it better or
right,
worse, but
right.
there are different tastes, and
Yes.
I do not feel that the industry right now is catering to all tastes. I think the industry is right now is catering to one of those two tastes, which happens to also partake of a lowest common denominator kind of, ooh, in this game, if things don't go my way, I can make them go my way as a player, as opposed to my character can do certain kinds of things, and if they can't succeed within the bounds of those abilities that they have, then they face the consequences, right? Those are different.
All right.
uh, ah.
Put up your dukes. Uh, all right.
I
Well,
don't I don't want to fight. I
right,
want the story gaming people to just move
exactly.
aside and to have your own separate hobby, please.
I don't know. I mean,
Instead of turning this thing with a 50-year pedigree of doing a particular new kind of game, instead of taking that over, which is how it seems to me.
all right. It does. I see that. I don't know. I'm trying. I'm drawing out an argument we don't want to have. I think we basically agree on this. That they're two separate things, and they should both agree. And you should have your peanut butter if you like your peanut butter, and your chocolate,
Sure.
and mix them if you like that too.
Yes, yes. Though when you mix them, you have now got peanut butter
Yeah.
because Now you're playing a game that is about having peanut butter instead of a game that is about having chocolate.
All right. Well, Jeff, we've gotten to the hour. I know you have some place to be today. Thank you very much for coming and
Thank you so
having
much,
this
Stan.
chat
This was
with me.
fun.
I haven't put this up. We talked about it a little earlier. Monkey House Games is one of the
Yes.
places to find your stuff. Uh,
That's where you can find all of the Villains and Vigilantes stuff.
and
That's me and Jack Herman.
well,
Now, my
finally,
my my partner Manda and I
yeah,
have another company, Unigames. Unfortunately, our website is down right now. But if you look for Unigames on Drive Through RPG,
right.
you'll find all our stuff there. Or if you go to the print on demand place, lulu.com, and search for Unigames, you'll find us there. We make a bunch of different RPGs. We have the award winning Paleolithic role playing game, Cave Master. We have Baythorm, which got a certain amount of discussion tonight. Quicksilver, which is our fantasy RPG. And I'm probably forgetting more that we've
Are you
got.
still
All kinds of great things there.
putting twerps stuff into the world?
No, I sold the TWERPS rights years ago when I thought I was done with being in the paper games industry completely. I landed this cool computer game industry job, and then a couple of years later got laid off. And
Mm.
so here I am back again. But I sold the TWERPS stuff to Luzaki.
Oh, okay.
So game
Um,
science has that now.
all right. Thank you, Jeff. Hold on. I'll do an outro, and then I just want to have finish our little chat. But thank you again. I will put links to all these things in the show notes. Monkey House Games, though, is there on the screen right now, so write it down if you're looking at this. Thanks, Jeff. All right. Well, so there's another fun conversation. Um, you know, Jeff, I think was a little worried that he was causing controversy at the end. I don't think so. If you think so, leave us comments. Uh, I want this all conversation to continue. If you are enjoying this show, please, please, please subscribe to our free newsletter at 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. That'll let you know who the new guests are, and you'll get to see the art that, like the one I've been working on today, when it's finished. Subscribers will get to see it right away before it gets in the pipeline to get revealed to the world later on. There are also paid levels. I don't push that as much, but their paid levels will get you some extra behind the scenes stuff and some discounts on the merch that I'm doing for the show. So thank you all for tuning in. If you're watching this, well, we've had a couple of people in the live chat, though they have not been talkative. There have been people watching us live. If you're watching this now, it's recorded. Next time I will be live. We'll be back, be able to interact. So until then, thank you very much and take care. Bye.